Hello and welcome to the Jewish Leadership Project's webinar. I'm Charles Jacobs. I think most people know me. Thank you for attending. As you know, our mission at the Jewish Leadership Project is focused on the failure of the establishment Jewish leadership in America to protect and defend the Jewish community in the face of what we all see as a rapidly surging anti-Semitism. By the Jewish establishment, I'm referring, of course, to the legacy organizations that are failing us. That is the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, the Jewish Federations, the JCRCs, the Jewish Community Relations Council, and sadly, most of the non-Orthodox rabbinate and others. Today, I'm here with, along with my partner, Avi Goldwasser, to discuss what may well be the first announced strategic plan by any Jewish federation in the country to organize its community to fight anti-Semitism. The Boston Federation, which here is known as the Combined Jewish Philanthropies, the CJP, along with the local Greater Boston Jewish Community Relations Council, announced that it will partner with the Anti-Defamation League on a 5-point plan to, quote, stop Jew hate now. We expect that though this is about Boston, since the same thinking prevails in legacy Jewish organizations across the country, that what you hear and learn here today will apply to your own cities. So the failure of Jewish leadership is a national problem, and to give us a national perspective, we've asked Jonathan Tobin, who is the chief editor of the Jewish News Service, JNS, who is a prolific and a prescient columnist and now also a podcaster, to start us off with the national picture. So here's Jonathan.
Thank you, Charles. And thanks to the Jewish Leadership Project and all those who have logged on today to join in this discussion about anti-Semitism and the future of American Jewry. While the focus of this program is the specific failure of Jewish leadership in Boston, let me place this in the context of broader national trends that are similarly troubling. American Jews are confronted by very different challenges than those they faced in the past. While Jews and their leaders are familiar with forms of right-wing extremism and anti-Semitism, the rise of different forms of Jew hatred have left them confused, unprepared, and often disinterested in addressing new and potent threats to the Jewish community. The emergence of left-wing anti-Semitism, which is rooted in hatred for Israel, that has been embraced by the intersectional left and political progressives, that has not merely made the lives of Jewish students on college campuses uncomfortable. It has now gone mainstream in the form of routine anti-Zionist advocacy in the mainstream liberal media, as well as the ability of radical Israel haters to gain a foothold in the National Democratic Party. The willingness of the corporate press to treat open anti-Semites, like Representatives Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, as progressive rock stars, speaks to the seriousness of the problem. While Jewish leaders are still obsessively focused on right-wing extremism, serious though it is, much of the Jew hatred in the United States now comes from minority groups like African Americans and Muslims, who are influenced by hate mongers like the Nation of Islam's Louis Farrakhan, as well as by intersectional ideology that falsely analogizes the Palestinian war on the existence of the sole Jewish state on the planet with the struggle for civil rights in the United States. They and other progressives who are similarly influenced by toxic myths of critical race theory believe that Jews and Israelis are beneficiaries of white privilege who oppress Palestinian people of color. That not only ignores the fact that the majority of Jewish Israelis are themselves people of color by the definition of the intersectional left, but illustrates how CRT grants a permission slip for anti-Semitism that is readily embraced by the political left that doesn't understand that anti-Zionism is just another form of anti-Semitism. These new forms of hatred constitute a potent threat to Jewish security in the streets, on the campuses, and yes, even in Congress. Sadly, Jewish leaders have failed to respond to this challenge with the urgency or the attention it requires. Legacy organizations like Jewish Federations, Community Relations Councils, the Anti-Defamation League, and the Liberal Rabbinate have largely been missing in action when it comes to dealing with any form of anti-Semitism that cannot be tied, however improbably, to the political enemies of the left. Even worse, many of them are themselves complicit in the effort to mainstream concepts like equity, the opposite of the goal of equality, as well as critical race theory ideology and a Black Lives Matter movement that is similarly tainted by anti-Semitism. Seen in that context, it is readily apparent just how inadequate and futile efforts like the combined Jewish philanthropy's 5-point plan to address anti-Semitism, which fails to take note of these threats, truly are. I hope you will pay close attention to the presentations about this issue that will follow and draw the appropriate conclusion about the need for a new Jewish leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan Tobin. I'll tell you, I think there could be no better, clearer, or more compact statement of the problem than what you just heard, everybody. It is precious, and we will make it available to everyone here today for you to distribute to your friends and contacts. Now, let me turn this over to Avi Goldwasser. Go ahead, Avi.
Okay, so again, let's just sort of summarize about information that you're all familiar with in terms of the growing hostility that we face as a community from multiple sources.
Satanic Jews that control everything and mostly everybody. You know what they do? Call me an anti-Semite. Stop it. I'm anti-termite.
Jews have ever been present among us is to open their outposts, their retail stores, to sell us damaged, cheap goods, marked up against the price. They were down there in the cotton fields in the Mississippi Delta teaching the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants who were too stupid to keep us in check after the end of the Civil War. It was the Jews that have taught the white man all the way up to the NBA right now. A modern day microcosm of a plantation. Minister Farrakhan, contrary to this idea, he attacks them. He is Allah's weapon against them as a life-giving son. He is exposing them. He is making them known because through the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad that only he is bringing, that's right, we will be freed of this blood-sucking parasite, so they will no longer be able to sell us alcohol, drugs, depraved sex, and every other type of low-life thing that is keeping us from a hereafter.
A deluge of anti-Semitic attacks in Brooklyn over the last couple of weeks committed exclusively by members of the Black community.
It seemed like the Jewish people own all the buildings out here, and they own everything, and they're not sharing nothing.
They own everything. They're coming over here, they're taking over, but they're not renting it back to us. See, they're kicking us out. Love conquers all. They're controlling all the jobs, the economic growth, and the community.
You think the Jews here are not really American?
They know it.
So black people would have reason to attack Jews.
I wouldn't say they have reason to, but it is understandable.
Shocking video shows kids in Philadelphia, in America, at an Islamic center appearing to vow to chop off heads and sacrifice their lives, all in the name of Allah. Watch.
شهداؤنا وهبوا الحياة رخيصة فازوا بجنات من الرضوان فاحت عطور المسك من أجسادهم أوها تكون القدس عاصمة لهم وتكون مرتع مرجب وجبان
وسنضرب الآلاق عن أجسادهم ونحرر الأقصى الحزين العاري ونقود جيش.
We will chop off their heads.
Genocide! Anti-Israel! Anti-baby killing! Anti-Israel! Anti-Israel!
truth of the matter is, your days are numbered.
We support the Anti-Father!
We support the Anti-Father! Hey, hey! Oh, ho! The state of Israel's got to go! Hey, hey! Oh, ho! The state of Israel's got to go!
There's a Holocaust happening in the Holy Land.
Anti-Father! Anti-Father! Long live the Anti-Father! Long live the Anti-Father! Long live the Anti-Father!
Some days in class, I would not wear my Jewish star necklace because it was easier to not be identified as a Jewish student.
Israel! Al-Matli America! Thank you.
So please keep these images in mind when you see the Jewish community response as to how to deal with this kind of hostility. And you can judge how adequate it is, how serious it is. Now, I could have had more hours of this hostility to Jews, but I think you're familiar with most of it. And if you want to deal with hostility to Jews, we need to understand why Jews are hated. You need to have some theory. And this is a short video by Thomas Sowell that I think really highlights a key factor in Jew hatred.
So that the question is, why this particular kind of people are the targets of so much venomous hatred? And I think the answer is that they not only succeed, they succeed in a way which is a threat to the egos of other people. That is, you can envy a Rockefeller, but he's no threat to your ego, because you say, listen, anybody can be rich if he's born a Rockefeller. And most people, when they have a choice between hating others and hating themselves, they hate others. One official of one of the Jewish organizations in New York asked me, what can Jews themselves do in order to minimize the hostility they face? And I gave him a one-word answer: fail. Because as long as you succeed, you're going to be hated.
Yep. Okay, so the problem with Jewish leaders is they tend to ignore the reality that hostility, ethnic hostility and violence are downstream from demonization. You heard Louis Farrakhan and his disciples demonize Jews. You heard other people demonize Jews. That's going to translate at some point into violence. And that's what we're saying. It's only a matter of time, and it's an old script. When the Nazis came to power in 1933, the first thing they did is demonize Jews. They didn't build gas chambers. They demonized Jews. They prepared the population to hate Jews even more than they did before that. So to stop the hate, we need to stop the demonization. And you know where that demonization comes from. And we'll see the plan. We'll see how the Jewish community expects to deal with this demonization or not deal with it. This demonization is a thing you've heard. I think Sal correctly pointed out. It's driven by envy. It's a tribal instinct. It's a natural human instinct to envy successful people. Leads to resentment. And the bad thing, the worst thing can happen is when that infects the body politics. Identity politics and the consequences that we're seeing today are all driven by the same motives, and they cannot be ignored. Well, before we talk about the actual plan, let's talk about how successful the Jewish Community Federation in Boston has been in whatever they've done to stop the hostility against Jews. Charles?
Yeah. Okay. So by way of introduction, we just saw this very disturbing video of the 4 kinds of Jew hatred that we now see attacking us all at once. It's like a perfect storm, right? Most Jews in this country still don't know. They still don't know that we're in this much trouble because, again, Jewish leaders for decades just let this mount up against us. You know how you boil a frog? You don't put him in, if you threw him in a boiling water, he would jump right out. You put him in water, it's tepid, and you turn on the heat, and now we're at the boiling point, and all of a sudden, now the same people who let this come to a boiling point are telling us they can stop it. Okay, so media, let's go to the media. they figured out a new way to hate Jews. After the Holocaust, it wasn't really nice to be able to defame Jews because all those pictures of Auschwitz were there and people did have pity and you couldn't do it. But 70 years later, they found a new way to hate Jews, and that is to diminish and defame the biggest world Jewish project, which is Israel. And Jewish leadership completely failed to understand that what the media was doing on a daily basis it was not legitimate criticism of Israel's policies, which is what they told us it was, but it was the defamation of Israel. We were in Boston. CAMERA was launched, CAMERA, Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting in America, the best media watchdog. They were launched in Boston because the ADL and its colleagues failed to understand the new anti-Semitism. The ADL was asked to take on this problem. Important people said to them, you should be the ADL for Israel. Abe Foxman declined, and that's what happened. Even today, as it's kind of like a Chinese balloon of hatred that is flowing over the Jewish world, dropping poison on us. Even today, these Jewish leaders, the ADL, the Federation, the JCRC, there's nothing in their plan to shoot that balloon down. It's just horrible. Then on the campuses, next slide, Avi. Okay, so in Boston, we could tell the story around the country because Avi and I made a film called Columbia Unbecoming. That was about New York and Columbia. But in Harvard, we found out that an anti-Semitic think tank in the Gulf sent Harvard $2 million to kind of influence their teaching in the Middle East. One girl stood up. Her name was Rachel Fish. Brave girl. She went to Hillel. They wouldn't help her. I was with her when she met with Jewish professors. They were afraid to say a word. It was despicable. So now, decades later, we have Ken Roth, who is the biggest anti-Semite on the left that there is, pretending that he's a human rights person. He owns Harvard. He just defeated an attempt to block him from getting a prized position at the JFK school. And that's what happened. So for all these years, because the Jewish community in Boston failed to fight the professoriate and what was going on at campuses, we lost that. And we've lost the universities. And there's Northeastern as well, where we went after Northeastern. And you know what the CJP told us at the time? Leave them alone. They just gave the Jewish kids kosher food in the cafeteria. Meanwhile, the head guy who taught Middle East studies was a rabid anti-Semite, anti-Israel guy. Okay, next. That's the campuses. Next slide. The liberal churches were warming up to the Palestinianist cause. More and more Palestinianist literature was going. Do you think that the CJP and the ADL and the JCRC and all of them might have had a campaign to block the poison against us that was going? Not a campaign. Nothing. No effort that I could see. Didn't work, whatever they did. Next. Okay. This is the biggest politically incorrect problem that we have, that Islam, certain sections of Islam hate the Jews and want to kill the Jews and preach that they want to kill the Jews. If you want to be really shocked, go to MEMRI, MEMRI, and you can see all across America, imams in American mosques saying, kill the Jews, kill the Jews. The second guy on the top row from the left, Yusuf Qaradawi, was on the board of the biggest mosque in Boston when it was coming here, the Islamic Society of Boston. There are two people down below, the Tsarnaev brothers. All these people are involved in the mosque that the Jewish community leadership, when we told them, we showed them documents, we wrote a book, we showed them sermons. They didn't want to touch it. They didn't want to touch it. And in fact, they lent credence that this was a moderate mosque. They were the drawbridge around where these barbarians, some of them, came across into Boston. And it was the Jewish community leadership that allowed this to happen. Not only allowed, but helped it happen. Next. Okay, the high schools. So we know now that the same thing that's happening in the college campuses, that all of that anti-Israel stuff has been curricularized and is being sent into the high schools. And we tried to stop this in Newton, Massachusetts, which is a Jewish suburb. And we got all the materials we could. We had to do Freedom of Information Act requests because they wouldn't give it to us. Without that, cost us lots and lots of money. We gave all of our materials to Camera here in Boston. Camera produced an undeniably truthful, perfect documentation of how bad this was. They had a 100-page document. It's called Indoctrinating Our Youth. You can get it from Camera. It's very interesting. If you have the problem, get it from Camera. And you know what? The CJP and the JCRC went to the mayor and told the mayor of Newton that we were exaggerating. Can you imagine? Okay, so these are the people. Next slide. Okay, they're ignoring our allies. You'll see they say they want to do allies. Well, who are they ignoring? They're ignoring the people who are our allies, political conservatives, other victims of jihad, like the Nigerians in America right now, like the Hindus in America right now, and Christian evangelicals. So those are like verboten to them to be allied with. They'd much rather ally with all the people that don't like us so much, and their allyship has meant nothing. Next. And of course, they support or don't attack structures and organizations who might harm us. We'll get to Hayas later about importing all these people from the Muslim world, from a Muslim world which is taught to hate Jews, without vetting them for what they think about Jews or women or democracy or blacks. Or freedom in America. But let's bring them all in because, we were once refugees. So that means that any refugee in the world is the same. So bring them all in. And it would be Islamophobic for you to ask them any question if they hate Jews before they come in. So that's who the people are for the last 25 years. This is their record of how they fought anti-Semitism. So now I'm going to turn it back to Avi, and he's going to talk about what their plan is now. Okay,
so you've seen the hostility toward Jews, and let's see what is the response from the Jewish leadership in Boston. As Charles pointed out, after decades of failing to honestly confront the problem, they come up with an action plan, which quite frankly can be described as just full of feel-good, nice-sounding words and delusional thinking. And you can judge for yourself. Quite frankly, as a Boston Jew, it's an embarrassment. It's mostly doubling down on their existing failed policies. They have a deficit of imagination and a deficit of courage. And the leadership provides no proof point that this plan will be any more effective than the failed plans of the past. And this is their plan. This is from their CJP website. Nice words. Enough is enough. We are alarmed. We are determined. We will work tirelessly to stop Jew hate. But these are just words, given their track record, as Charles pointed out. An example of how misguided they are, in the introduction to the full 5-point plan, the first thing they talk about is President Trump. Okay? That's the first thing they talk about. They start with the former president hosting a luncheon with, a Holocaust denier and a celebrity. That's the first thing they talk about, given everything that happened. What they totally are silent on is the stabbing of a rabbi by a Muslim immigrant in Boston. Next, they highlight that they really don't do a lot of content development. They will partner with the ADL. Well, the ADL is a problematic organization. It mostly promotes progressive causes in the name of protecting the Jewish community. ADL has been a source of increasing Jew hatred from the right, obviously. It promotes BDS activists. It supports Black Lives Matter and critical race theory, which demonizes Jews. It ignores what we would call inconvenient anti-Semitism by certain minorities. It's not politically correct to point out the truth. And finally, ADL educational materials, which are used in hundreds of schools, is being investigated for really being not very little to do with protecting Jews, a lot to do with social justice. And in fact, ADL has launched its own investigation of its own materials, given the complaints they received. And that's
in fact, in Florida, we work with a group that is tracking the ADL's teaching materials. ADL materials in Florida tells teachers that if you have a student who wants to change his pronouns to the opposite one that he was born with, you should not tell the parent about this unless you're given permission by the student. So they're keeping away from the parents. This is not honor your father and your mother stuff. This is crazy. And if ADL is doing that and inspiring absolute rage on the parts of parents, that's very, very bad. Go ahead.
Yep. Now, the actual plan. Again, this is from their website. They repeat, we are alarmed, we are determined, we will work tirelessly. And let's get in. And this is the 5-point plan that they propose to fight the hostility. Number 1 is to face Jew hatred. I will go through in more detail. This is just a summary of the 5 points. Face Jew hatred, which means raise public awareness through a campaign to fight back, whatever that means. 2, empower our community. Sounds nice. Empower with what? And their answer is empower, direct people to a website. Next, build allies, allyship. 4, educate the next generation of young people. And 5 is strengthen communal security. Okay, let's go through each one. Face Jew hatred. The strategy here is basically to tell stories, first-person accounts of victims of Jew hatred. Lifting our voices, okay, as they call it, is to generate pity and empathy through these stories. This is what they consider fighting back, telling story, so people feel sorry for the Jews. Next, hiring a public relations firm to discourage Jew hatred. Since when has that worked? And the final point is, if you think about what they're doing here, is Jews fight violence, harassment, and bigotry with stories. So you saw the video of all the people who are hostile to us. You think stories will sway them? Certainly the Holocaust stories haven't swayed them. Next, empower the community. Wonderful word, empower. Empower with what? And the answer is a web page. We're going to fight back with a web page, and that will empower people. The web page will motivate people to fight back. What are they smoking at CJP headquarters? By the way, CJP headquarters is located on High Street. It has new meaning. And when has information ever deterred Jew hatred?
The other thing they want to do, Avi, is they want to put these messages on billboards, right? They're going to put stories about poor Jews who are victims of anti-Semitism on billboards throughout the community. Well, I work with people in Dorchester and the working class sections of Boston, and they're friends of mine, and they like Jewish people. And I asked them, how would this be people? And they say, this is crazy. People will, poor Jews. It's too bad. They don't even know what anti-Semitism is. They don't know. They're not going to like those billboards. Not only that, but in California already, our enemies go up to the billboards that we pay for and put their own messages on them. So this hasn't been thought out.
Okay. Next, build allyship. They've been doing it for 40 years. Not much. Where were the allies when Jews were being beaten up, when Jews are demonized? but they're going to keep trying to build allies with influential non-Jewish people. How about doing it with influential Jewish people who are not speaking up? And they're not interested, as Charles pointed out, in building allies with Christians and conservatives. If the years of decades of effort, it doesn't appear as if we're getting close with this strategy, and they're doubling down. What they need to do is have allies with those who have power. If Jew hatred was punished to the same degree as racism is punished today, we may see some results. Next, the fourth point of the 5-point plan: educate the next generation. Okay? Give young people the tools they need to fight back. What are the tools? Not clear. More training, more information. Meanwhile, they've abandoned the Jews on campus for decades. They are not fighting hard enough against ethnic studies, critical race theory, and Black Lives Matter, which seep into the education system to inflame Jew hatred. And they are promoting progressive ideology. The ADL is a major promoter of progressive ideologies such as ethnic studies, critical race theory, diversity, equity, inclusion, which harms Jews. And the final step, which is hard to argue with, strengthen communal security. Absolutely should do that. And we need to get the FBI, the authorities, to monitor the sources of the hostility, the sources of the demonization. We know where they come from. They come from the media, academia, churches, mosques. Anyway, that's their plan, and you can judge for yourself how serious it is, what chances it has of success. But I think we need to understand why these Jewish leaders keep coming up with plans that have no proof point of success and keep repeating the same mistakes. It's a kind of strange situation where Jewish leaders are disconnected from reality. So this is a little video trying to explain.
There's a human tendency to want to believe in favorable outcomes. It's quite natural as a coping mechanism in difficult situations. This may be an extreme example, but I think you're all familiar with the famous sign outside the Auschwitz gate, which translates in English to mean "work makes you free." I'm not sure how many people believed it, but I'm sure many did. They wanted to believe it. They really wanted to, because the alternative was just too hard, too painful. On college campuses today, many Jewish students want to believe in the myth of inclusiveness, of diversity, of a welcoming environment, a safe space for everyone. But of course, the reality is different for many Jewish students. This kind of utopian thinking also permeates many Jewish leaders. It makes them feel good about themselves. I'm sure you've heard many sermons by rabbis talking about brotherhood, welcoming the stranger, and world peace. And they may truly believe what they're saying. Certainly history and news around the world today raises serious question about the validity of what they preach.
This liberal paradigm that we are all good people and that if we're only nice to other people, they'll be nice to us, is more than just an intellectual commitment, it's an emotional commitment. I don't want to believe that you are so malevolent that I have to fight you. And as a result, when you meet people who might be bad people, you can't afford to identify them. One of the dimensions of the problem is what a number of people have called moral narcissism, which is this, it's an overwhelming concern about personally being a moral person and really not caring about the consequences outside of one's own solipsistic concerns.
That's the good Jew. The Jew who helps everyone else. The Jew who puts others before themselves. The Jew who cares more about strangers than they do about family.
The world is a messy place, but for moral narcissists, the key thing is I want to feel good about myself.
I think if you look at the issue of Jewish leaders, too often it's exactly about feeling good about themselves, ingratiating themselves to their fellow progressives, and not necessarily doing what's best for the Jewish community. So you just heard what the CJP plan is and why we think it's weak, it's somewhat delusional. So it's one thing to criticize them, but we also want to share with you our vision of what must be done. Go ahead, Charles.
Yeah, I just wanted to say before we hit this, I'm reading their plan here, and they promise to provide skill-building opportunities to empower families to address issues of anti-Semitism. So they think that there are skills that we already have that work, that they're going to now give us. I don't believe there are such skills, or at least that they don't know them. And if they did, why are they waiting all this time to unleash them to us and let us know their secrets? Okay, so let me walk us through what we think. This is from way on top with no granularity, pretty much. So what needs to be done? So they need to declare a state of emergency. And they did that, actually. By the way, I am very suspicious that parts of what they say in here come from our 10-point plan, because we've been hawking them forever. And the biggest thing we said is, you got to declare a state of emergency. You've got to tell the Jews we're in trouble. Okay, so they did that. Second, increase physical security. Well, they say they're doing that. By the way, they should also think about every Jew should consider learning how to do self-defense. There's a program called Legion. You should look it up. It'll teach you how to defend yourself. Somebody else suggests that there should be no bar or bat mitzvahs until that young boy or girl brings a certificate of self-defense to the rabbi. I like that idea. Stop the demonization of Jews in Israel in the media. There's nothing about the media in their plan, right? The media is the biggest source, the original source of Jew hatred in this new anti-Semitism methodology of defaming and biased reporting. Academia, K-12, you've got to get everybody to understand that critical race theory and DEI define the Jews by their very nature and by the principles of the foundational principles of CRT and DEI. The Jews are adjacent white people. America only has two classes of people, oppressors or oppressed. We're dumped in the oppressor part. Everybody who gets the the K-12 curriculum is going to learn that Jews live on undeserved wealth, and they, not to mention that they support a racist apartheid state in Israel, etc. There's nothing I see in terms of a pushback on this that makes any sense from the Combined Jewish Philanthropies and the JCRC and the ADL. In fact, just the opposite. 4. We have got to shift the focus from social justice concerns. These are nice things to do, but if you're in an emergency, if you really meant it when you said they were in an emergency, stop helping everybody else right now. Start focusing on helping and protecting the Jewish community. Help others who will help us. Next slide. Okay. Educate the community about Jew hatred, and that doesn't mean just talking about neo-Nazis and Donald Trump. It means talking about the inconvenient anti-Semitism that comes from Muslims or radical Muslims, that comes from the Black community, and that comes from the left. And that's what they haven't done. That's what they're afraid to do, but that's what they must do. That's what we must do. Next, you have to deconstruct the social theories and rhetorical methods that result in our demonization, which I just talked about before. Intersectionality. Look, intersectionality is this idea that all people of color and other victims like transgenders and homosexuals, they're all in one boat. They kicked us out of that boat. We're now on the oppressor side. So now intersectionality means being against Jews and Israel. Okay, next. Exposed and counter the threat of importing. Okay, so they're all for importing refugees. And I mentioned this before. I looked at a study about what Syrian schools teach every child in Syria. There's only one set of schools you can go to, government controlled. An Israeli think tank looked at their curriculum. Jews are the devil. Jews are dogs and pigs. Jews must be defeated. So you're going to take all of those Syrians. You're not going to ask any one of them what they think. Not everybody would believe it, right? What they're taught in school. You're not even going to ask them what they think. You're going to say, these moral narcissists are going to say, we're good people because we let in all refugees. And who do you think is beating up the Jews in Europe? It's these people. I had a conversation with the former head of CJP. Well, that's a police problem. That's what you want to do. You want to import them all and then wait for them to beat us up and then turn them to the police. Not a very strategic point of view. Next slide, Avi. Okay, couple more. Jewish education. We have got to go back to teaching Jewish kids that we're a nation, we have an identity, we're pride. It's important to be Jewish. We're part of a people. That has to be, and it has to be made affordable. I know it's hard. Next, we have to build alliances with people who will care for us and stop building alliances with people who don't like us. All of this, do you know how much money and resources and energy and power and love has been given to groups who we don't even ask to cover our back? Or if we do, they're not supporting us. They're not reciprocating anything that we've given. Where is the strategy in Boston, for example, or anywhere? You've got all these great relationships with Black pastors because you've supported every possible thing that they've wanted you to support. Good. Why don't you go there and talk to them about Black anti-Semitism? Why don't you go there and make a plan that you and the pastor will sit in the church and talk about what Jews did good for the Blacks and why Black anti-Semitism is not good for the Blacks besides it's hateful and ungodly. Where's that program? There's so many things they could do. No. Why don't they ask the Muslim allies they have who belong to these radical mosques? Why don't they ask, can you show us what you're teaching your congregations about who the Jews are? That would be an interesting thing, right? Anyway, I'm getting emotional about this because, I wanted to, Avi and I talked about we should have a tone of lament. Well, it gets you angry because they have abandoned us and now they're showing us this silly little plan that really isn't doing anything but spending money and giving them a check off the box. They declared an emergency. Enough. Avi.
Okay, so this is sort of the summary of their plan and what we think of their plan, as well as what is our vision of what they should do. We've discussed these 10 points with the head of CJP in Boston. They're aware of it. They, I think, may have been influenced somewhat in their effort, but they're marching forward with an expensive public relations firm, with billboards, and with ADL to try to train people not to hate Jews without understanding why do people hate Jews and why this kind of training hasn't worked in the past, why showing Jews as victims hasn't worked using the Holocaust. How will it work because some Jew was beaten up in Brooklyn? But anyway, we will share these thoughts with them again. We've tried in the past, and we're going to try to educate the Boston community to understand the kind of leadership they have that has failed in the past and is planning, in effect, to fail again.
Okay. I want to say thank you to everybody. Avi, you want to say a last word?
Just last word. I appreciate the frustration that you all convey at the failure of Jewish leadership by making great suggestions of what they should be doing and are not doing. As you know, we are not focused on attacking those who hate us. We are focused on getting Jewish leadership to do their job. So what we need you to do is help us think about how we can influence, how we can change existing Jewish leadership. And not the community, which is hard. If you change the leadership, that will impact the community. That's a leverage point. If we can flip a Jewish leader, one federation, that's going to have a bigger impact than if we get one Jew in one community to see the light. So we got to deal with the leadership, which means we have to identify the donors who control the leadership. They're the ones who need to be educated. They're the ones who need to use their power and influence to give us better, stronger leaders.
And in your communities, go do some research and find who the donors are to the Federation and the JCRCs and the ADL in your community. And that's where your targeting should be. One more thing I forgot to mention, Club Z. So SSI and Camera for colleges, Club Z for high schools. Go look them up. They're wonderful. Club Z. Okay, everybody. From strength to strength. Thank you very much. Am Yisrael Chai.